Good day to you. This sermon recap is for Christ the King, Sunday, the year B, the year of Mark, preached at University Lutheran on November 25th, 2012. Liturgically, the church year ends its year with Christ the King, or the Reign of Christ Sunday. It's how we end one church year, and then Advent, next Sunday, the first Sunday in Advent, begins the next year, so we go into the year C, the year of Luke. But we end in this year B, with Christ the King, with a text from John. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoning Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "Then you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." We began yesterday with some fun thinking about Monopoly pieces. What was your favorite piece, your go-to piece? Maybe even currently when you play Monopoly. All for the sake of transitioning to my favorite piece growing up as a kid learning chess was the knight. If you know anything about chess, it's certainly not the most important piece on the board. In fact, far from it. But by the fact that it's a horse and that it has this unusual movement pattern of 2 forward and 1 to the right, 2 forward and 1 to the left, 2 to the right, 1 forward, 2 to the left, 1 back, and that it's able to leapfrog other pieces and land on an empty spot or to jump, seemed as a kid to be a cool thing. That a bishop only moves diagonally across the board, forward and back, that the rook moves, the piece that looks a bit like a castle top, moves straight lines front and back, left and right, that the pawn is the tiny little piece that is used to sacrifice in the game to gain some place on the board or some advantage in the game. Hence the term, they're treating us like pawns, this sense of being willing to be sacrificed for the sake of some bigger good. That the queen, she is by most counts probably the most important piece on the board, the most powerful piece in her ability to go in any direction for as many spaces as long as she's not blocked. But the king is the point of the game. The king is the purpose of the game. When the king is no more, then the game is no more. And so all the other pieces then have their being for the sake of protecting the king. That the king is a dignified piece. It only moves one space at a time, one move at a time, forward, back, left or right, diagonal or otherwise. And the king usually only moves, there are exceptions, but the king usually only moves to escape danger. That when the call check is made, that means your king is in great peril, great danger, and that the king himself will have to move at least to get out of that danger, or some other piece has to come to rescue him, to save him from being captured. All of that to say, here is Pilate and here is Jesus, a king and a king toward the end of the Gospel of John, face to face, king and king, and there is this match going on in some sense of check and check and check. This face to face confrontation between Pilate and Jesus. And to speak more precisely, Pilate is a prefect. He is, so to speak, a Roman governor. Jesus is this rabbi that has gone crazy on the calls, the cries, the screams of Hosanna and palms and paranoid priests. And so they come face to face toward the end of the Gospel of John, and the word king or kingdom is used much in this section. And so Pilate says to him, "Are you a king?" And in fact, the Greek allows that it's a statement. You are a king. And in fact, Jesus seems to indicate that so in his answer by saying, "You say, I am king. Who told you this? Was it you, or have you heard it from another?" We know something about Pilate from history, not only the four Gospels, John again having the most extensive piece on Pilate, but Pilate was also written about by Josephus and Philo of Alexandria and Tacitus, that we know that he was the Roman prefect in Judea from 26 to 36, that he, of all the prefects of that time, was the most brutal toward faith, toward the people of faith, Jews and otherwise, that in fact he took some of the money that was raised for the temple and built instead aqueducts with that, and then when the people rose up to protest that, he put plainclothes Roman soldiers in the crowd, and when someone would lift up their voice to protest this money being spent that way, he would have his soldiers give a signal was given, and they would kill the protesters. That he placed outside of King Herod, the puppet king of the Jews. He would set outside Roman soldiers with golden spears and shields, so again to remind the people and Herod himself that he was not really king. In fact, he didn't really even have the term king because of Rome. Pilate's reign ends in 36 when he slaughters a bunch of Samaritans who go on pilgrimage to pay homage to some site attributed to Moses. And so then Pilate is called back to Rome, and in fact then gets sent into exile and dies. There's some conflict or some conflicting stories about how he died, one by suicide, others by other ways, but certainly he dies disgraced. That we know about Pilate. And when Jesus answers him, and so the question I ask, so that's Pilate the king, how about Jesus the king? And that's obviously a loaded question, and it's too long of a sermon. There's many expectations of what the king, what the Messiah would be, and certainly Jesus bears those in the four Gospels, in John. But I just wanted to focus on the one response of Jesus. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world, because if my kingdom was of this world, there would be others who would come to fight on my behalf." And all I want you to hear in that is that we have to be careful how we hear that. Jesus is not saying that my kingdom is of some other place. That's typically how we hear his answer. What he is saying, really, is that my kingdom is not like your kingdom. That my kingdom doesn't take the shape and the brutality and the coercion of your kingdom. If my kingdom was like your kingdom in that way, I would have plainclothed soldiers with swords and shield, ready to do great harm and inflict great mortal wounds. That Jesus isn't saying that my kingdom is somehow removed from this place and this time and this people in this space, especially in John. That Jesus' kingdom is precisely about flesh and blood and Judea and 30 AD. It's precisely about king and king. It's precisely about kingdom and kingdom. It's precisely about truth. And so we have this check and check and check and check. Jesus says, I've come because of truth. And Pilate says, but what is truth? And is it not the changing law? And so some commentators want to say that Pilate is the one who's actually on trial in this. I think that's too strong. I think there is this sense in Pilate, this brutal man, with his wife having the dream and all these other pieces, that he finally washes his hands and says, you've done nothing wrong. I can't find wrong in this man. But there is this kind of honest, basic, beard laid open conversation between king and king. And Jesus says, I am king in that sense, but not king as you are king. The very premise, the very foundation of the Gospel of John, the prologue, is about one who is, the Word becomes flesh and dwells among us, and the kingdom of truth. We behold his glory and truth as a Father's only Son. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That there is something about God's kingdom that is true, and that truth is not with this kind of force, and this kind of bullying, and this kind of coercion. That's the rub. That's the check, and the check, and the check, and the check. That is this piece of John. A woman in a sermon, Martha Spong, talked about the term checkmate. It comes from an ancient Persian phrase which means the king is helpless. And so that odd phrase that ends the game of chess, typically that you knock over the opposing player's king and you call out checkmate, you're saying the king is now helpless. After this match between Jesus and Pilate, check, 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 Pilate finally declares checkmate. And Jesus is crucified on the cross. But Pilate has even the last word, or seemingly the last word, that God affirms in the resurrection, that Pilate in 3 languages places above Jesus' head the King of the Jews. Others come to argue that or disagree with that, but what Pilate says, what I have written, I have written. Here is Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. For us, as disciples of Him, certainly it is our cry in a way of worship, in a way of glory for Christ, for God the Father, Son, and Spirit, that Christ is King. And we, as people of His kingdom, the reign of Christ, we are freed. The truth will set us free, that we are freed from acting in ways of the kingdoms of the world that wish to dominate and consume and use up and spit out, that we are instead called to the sacrifice of love and service to one another, and that's where we've been in the Gospel of John with Jesus washing one another's feet, that this is a different kind of kingdom. This is a different kind of rule, but it's here and now. It's surely coming, but the prologue of John and the water turned to wine and the resurrection of Lazarus in John signals that this kingdom, this reign of Christ, this Christ is a king of a kingdom, of a reign that's very much here and now. And Pilate, I think, in whatever way Pilate can, understands that. And so is this section of John. A blessed Christ the King week for you, a blessed beginning of Advent in these days. Grace and peace, be well.